Brooke and I have been doing the 10 Commandments study with you guys, and we are on the very last one, the 10th one, and how the Exodus 20:17, as Jackie read, is where we are going to be today. So, with this commandment, it's the last one, and we are, our summary from last time we did this was God doesn't want us to desire what other people have, but to desire what God has for us.
And I'll add Luke 12:24 was a verse that we talked about. It's consider the ravens, they do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds?
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That God is building a spot for us in heaven.
Praise the Lord.
And that's what He wants for us, wants us to want. And if we follow Satan's path for us, it's going to be a lot different and a lot harder for us. God doesn't want to make it hard. He's trying to make it as easy as He can for us. And so as we start, there's temptations. There's all over this place. And God didn't put it there. We know that. It's Satan. He's in each one of our lives. And how if we fall for these temptations, then where does that leave us? So, God doesn't set us up to fail. We do that ourselves. But I have a story here. It's in 2 Samuel. Samuel 11. That whole chapter is on David and Bathsheba. I'm just going to kind of summarize it. So if he was up on the roof and saw Bathsheba and coveted her, wanted her as his wife. But was that God's plan?
No.
But God didn't stop him. We have to make our own decisions. So if we go down that path like David did, doesn't mean God gave up on us. He's still there for us. And how if we catch ourselves there, we can always turn around. There's another one I want to share with you guys. It was Jesus. Because he also got tempted. And how if God gets tempted and he's connected with God, if Jesus got tempted and he's already connected with God, how much more is Satan trying to tempt us? And how we he knows our weakness, so he's gonna try it. And if we stay true like Jesus did and know our Bibles and know the path God wants us to do, we can fight off the devil. And that how if let's turn to Matthew 4. 11.
I'll read it. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If you be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Then the devil takes him up into the holy city and sets him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, If you be the Son of God, cast yourself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest at any time you dash your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, It is written again, You shall not tempt the Lord your God. Again the devil takes him up into an exceeding high mountain, and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and said to him, All these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me. Then said Jesus to him, Get you hence, Satan, for it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Then the devil leaves him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him.
Isn't that amazing?
It's beautiful.
Beautiful.
So,
What a lesson.
yes, it is. God is giving us an example how to get out of the devil's traps he set for us. And if God can send him away, we can send Satan away with God's power
Amen.
within us. And so we just want to really realize what God's path is, so we can know how to fight the devil.
So the title that we were looking at is Desiring God. So I want to talk a little bit more about, well, how do we even do that? And one of the things that came to mind when I was thinking about this is aligning yourself with God's desires. That's the opposite of don't covet. Is okay, then what should I be desiring? This commandment reveals the condition of our hearts. And I'm going to read something to you. This quote you see at the bottom, The Secret Commandment by Skip Mullen, was an article I read, but I'm going to read further back in the article. So I thought this was very enlightening. It says this: There is no other legal code prohibiting coveting because it is unenforceable. Coveting is desiring, not taking. It is a secret desire. We are called to a holy life, not simply a life of outward compliance. To covet is to blaspheme, because coveting calls God unfair, unjust, and irresponsible. It's not what I desire that breaks the commandment, it's whose I desire. And that struck me because I was thinking about that. I know we talked about this at other times too, is if you look at law all over the world, the 10 Commandments are really dispersed all throughout that, all over the world. There are all kinds of laws about not stealing. There's all kinds of laws about, not taking other people's stuff, not lying, false witnesses. That's all over the place. But there really isn't a way to actually enforce. Nobody can. I don't know if you guys ever use this. I use this a lot with kids that I work with at work. I can't read your mind. Nobody can read somebody else's mind. Only God can do that. And that's where coveting really starts, is this idea of it's in here. It's not something that someone say, I see you're looking at that candy bar and you're going to steal that. I just know it. They might say that to you, but they don't know if that's what you're thinking. And nobody knows until you actually do that, unless you say something that that's what you're going to do. So that just struck me as this is really something that now at the end of the 10 Commandments, God is kind of saying, okay, by the way, here's all these different things that I want you to be aware of. And now he gets on the bottom and goes, as well as you need to have your heart, your mind, your attitude in the right direction. It's not in our power that we do this, and it's not because we're so great, but this quote I just read was talking about outward compliance. We can easily say, and I said this multiple times when we preached on this, oh, I've never done that, I've never done this, I've never done da-da-da-da. Yeah, but have I thought badly about somebody in my mind? Have I thought, oh man, I really want that new latest, greatest, whatever. Maybe. Insert whatever your thing is. I think we've all been there. Do I need that? Oh no, but I really want it. back to the very first commandment that we looked at, which is, shall have no other gods before me. If I am coveting, my desires are in the wrong direction. In fact, if you look at all the different commandments before this, so all the other 9 commandments, at the root of those is I want something, right? Like Stephanie was talking about with David and Bathsheba. David wanted Bathsheba. He broke what? The commandment says, shall not commit adultery. You could go back to any number of one of those things, but I want to tell this person this thing. It's not the truth, but it will save me from, getting in trouble. Right? That starts in my head before I even say whatever it is that I'm going to say. One of the things that I was thinking about in this too is, okay, so how do we align ourselves, as we're talking about, with God's desires? How do we do that? And I was reminded of a couple of different things. How many people here are familiar with the idea of love maps when we're talking about building relationships? I don't know, some people might be familiar, some people aren't. Okay, I'll just tell you anyway. So there is this concept, and y'all know I'm a counselor, a social worker, and I deal with all kinds of different people, and I also deal with couples, and I have had to do some training on this. And one of the concepts that was brought up, to give you the background, is this idea called love maps. So there's this guy and his wife, their names are Dr. John and Julie Gottman, and they are like the gurus of relationships, if you will, currently. And they have done a lot of research. And whenever they started this, they started bringing couples into what they called their love lab in Seattle. I might have mentioned this before. And they brought couples in, and they were trying to figure out how do the couples who are doing really well, how are they doing really well? What makes this work really well for them? And so they brought people in, volunteers, they come for a weekend to their lab, which was set up like a mini apartment, and there are certain places off limits, bathroom, bedroom, etc. And they would tape their conversations. And after a while, they started noticing patterns in the conversations that people were having with each other. And they started going, wow, and they followed them up, and they started to get pretty good. They can just about predict with 90% accuracy if somebody was going to make it or not based off of a couple different criteria, or couple was going to make it or not. And one of the things that they came up with after they said, hey, these things, if these are in a relationship, you are in big trouble unless you make changes, right? People made changes, there's hope. But if you don't make changes, probably not going to stick it out very long. So they also came up with some things of, well, how do we then build on the things that are working really well? And what some of the couples that were doing, actually all the couples that were doing well, he called them the masters, and the ones that weren't doing well, it's disasters. So the masters, which is what we're trying to be here today, is a thing called love maps. This is like a basic tool, and he builds it up and says these are building blocks. You got to have trust and commitment before you can even enter in, and you can insert any relationship into this. But thinking specifically about couples, he said, okay, so they have trust and they have commitment. And when you first are getting to know somebody, when you're first in quotes in love, right? People will tell me, hey, I want to know all about this other person. What they like, what do they like to do, what's their favorite colors, hey, what are you thinking? Like all the time. You're really, really, really into that. And they found that the couples who continued to update those maps in their head, the idea of who this person was in their head, did well. They would consistently be asking, hey, they might not ask it this way, is blue still your favorite color? Do you still like da-da-da-da? Hey, what's going on in your life today? They were updating and keeping track of that, hence why they call it love maps. In other words, if they've been together for a long time, they may have had one map when they were first getting to know each other. They've grown as individuals in a couple, and things have changed. And the couples that were doing well were keeping up with the changes. So bringing this back to spiritual application is this. You could say, kind of like the masters and disasters idea, you could say this. Actually, I'll give an example first. So, I have read through my entire Bible. And the first time I remember doing this, I remember this very well, because most of you who have ever tried to do this, when you do it cover to cover, where do you always get stuck? Leviticus. So I remember this very well, because I was like 15 or 16, and I was going to make it through the Bible, and I was at summer camp, and I was just reading cover to cover kind of thing. And I'm like, oh man, Leviticus, like what is this? And I knew there was good stuff on the other side of this, but I'm just slogging through. And I remember going out and going, okay, I'm gonna make this. So I get out, I go out into this porch. I'm 15 or 16, keep in mind, I'm not old enough to be a summer camp counselor, so I'm there like in the kitchen or something. So I have a little bit of more free time. I don't have any kids I'm responsible for. And I go out the porch, and I finally, like over a matter of a couple of days, I'm not on the porch for days for verification. I kept going back out the porch. I go out and I finish. I'm like, yes, I made it through Leviticus, and then I proceed to eventually make it through the whole Bible. I don't know when I finally finished and just remember the agony of being in the middle of Leviticus. But I did finish. And that's several years ago, okay? So I could say now, in terms of love maps, hey, I read the whole Bible. I know exactly what God is about. I don't need to read any more of that because I already got the idea. I read the whole thing cover to cover when I was 15. Done. I know exactly what God wants. In theory, that does not work, right? Because I have no updated concepts of who God is. I just have this now outdated concept that my 15-year-old mind had, and I'd like to think that I've matured since 15 in my brain. So yeah, I need to update that. So in reality, in practice, I have to, and we all are aware of this, I have to go back and keep reading, keep digging, and I do find, just like Gottman was talking about with couples, I do find new things. Wow, I didn't realize that when we go into Deuteronomy, which I also thought was a little bit dry, hey, Deuteronomy's got some good stuff in there. I never noticed that before.
Yes, indeed.
It does. But I would have never known that if I hadn't went and updated my love map with God. So I would encourage you to think about when you're trying to figure out, how do I align myself with God? Take the time to update that love map with God. Just like the couples that do really well take the time to get to know what's current with the other person, is we have a chance to get to know what's current with God. What does God care about? Now, some of those things are going to carry forward. God says the same things repeatedly in the Bible, but what is he currently doing now? What is he currently doing now in our church, in our community, in our world? What can we get involved in? How can we align ourselves with God's desires? So I want to look at Philippians 4:11. The other thing that I was thinking of was, how do we do that? The only way we do that too is we don't just speed read, like I was talking about. Speed read through Leviticus. Okay, you might have to if you're like me and trying to just get through. But eventually, someday, maybe you'll go back and dig in a little bit further in it, and you have to do a little bit of reflection. Because I could, again, using the same analogy, I could say, I'm reading my word now. I read about 5 minutes a day, quickly through that. Andrea was talking about this briefly, like just going through real quickly sometimes, and say, yeah, I did it. But if I don't think any further on it, yeah, check box, it's off, I did it. Yes. I don't think that I learned very much about that. So I have to reflect on what I just read in order to even gain anything about that. So that's the other important piece there too, is looking at, okay, so after I've read this, whatever this may be, what is God trying to tell me here? We were talking about promises in the Sabbath school this morning. Are there some promises in here? What is God concerned about today? What can I learn from him today? And also our motivation, right? What's our motivation for not only studying the Word of God? Is it, again, the checkbox? So I can say, I did it. I made it through the entire Bible. Yay. Now I can say that I've done that. Okay, I can say that I've done that, but does that really mean an awful lot? Not necessarily, other than yes, you've read through the entire Bible. But what was my motivation for that? If my motivation is I really want to be learning and I really want to be in the Word and I want to know what God's about, then yeah. But my motivation is literally just so that I can be like everybody else who's ever said that they've done that. It's not a very good motivation. Okay, so Philippians 4:11 and 12 says, this is Paul writing, I am not saying this because I am in need. For I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And Paul's a great example of this, because Paul, we know his story from the Bible. He has many trials, temptations, as Stephanie was talking about. Many things come up. You want to talk about somebody who's like, life changes all over the place? I mean, he is constantly, it seems like, everywhere. I know that he spends years in certain places, but I mean, he's just like this, that, and he's living well one moment, not so great another. They like him, they don't like him, and it's constant. And if I think about that, our lives are like that too in some ways. We may not be quite as tossed around as Paul, or quite as travel weary as Paul might be. Some of us might be. But Paul says there, though, I have learned to be content. He could have said, when he's kind of in a spot where he's like, oh, man, it was a lot better back over in that other town. They treated me a lot nicer, and the accommodations were a lot better over there. I think I'm going to go that way, because that's a lot nicer over that way. He says, no, I've learned to be content. Or he could say, even if he was in a good spot, oh, man, I really wish we had the latest and greatest technology for whatever so that we could get this out further, That's not what he said. He says, I've learned to be content in every situation. And how did he learn to be content? Not just because he's Paul, as we all know him, and who just knows his stuff. It's sort of like we were talking about Nehemiah in our Sabbath school lessons tonight too, because he already had a relationship with God, and he knew what God's desires were, and because he knew what God's desires were, and he was connected with God, God's desires became his desires. It didn't matter so much anymore where he was living, how people were treating him. As long as he was where God wanted him to be, he could be content, and he could say that. And I'm sure this is not just this perfect line of he found this epiphany and then he's like, oh, perfect every time. I'm sure there were moments where he was like, okay, God, what are we up to? But he keeps going. He keeps following along the path. He keeps updating those love maps. So the final thing I want to leave us with is this. Talking about all of this and aligning our desires with God by getting into the Word of God, it is not of our own doing. Yeah, we do have our part and we do need to take time, but God is in the business of changing hearts and lives. That's God's job. We can't do it on our own. We have a part to play in it, and we can say, God, I want to get to know you better, but God's the one that does that. So as you're thinking and reflecting on these 10 commandments here we put up for you, we really hope that you guys will get into God's Word. We hope that as you're trying to align your lives, as we're trying to align our church family lives together with God's purposes, that we will take the time to desire what God wants so that we, individually and as a church family, can do what God has for us to do together. Thanks for letting us share. We're going to close with prayer.